Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 2021 V2 release webinar. I'm Greg, the product manager, and I'll be leading this webinar. And with me, I have a few members of our technical engagement team, Hunter and Alec, who will help answer any questions you may have during the webinar. You can submit a question at any time in the chat. And if we can't answer it right away, then we'll try to answer them at the end. In this webinar, I'm going to show you all of the new things that we've added in the 2021 V2 release of ComponentOne and Studio Enterprise. This includes 2 brand new products, as well as many new features and controls to our existing product lines. In addition to the new features, we also provide bug fixes and minor enhancements to all the products, which you can check out in the changelogs or the release history in our documentation. I won't be able to go over all of those smaller enhancements and bug fixes during this presentation. And after I show you everything that's new, I'll show you how you can update to the latest version. I will start with our WinForms edition. As with the past few releases, we've been continuing to port our .NET Framework controls to .NET 5, re-engineering the controls where we can while keeping the same APIs. We've also been able to add some much-needed enhancements to FlexGrid and some other controls. And .NET 6, which is a seamless update from .NET 5, is supported. So everything we have in .NET 5 will be supported in .NET 6 by the end of the year. As we continue to migrate more controls to .NET 5 this release, the following controls are now available. The data filter, checklist, PDF document source, touch toolkit, color picker, DB navigator, mask text box, and print document. And C1 document, Flex report, and Flex viewer are out of beta and ready for production. We're now at about 66% migrated to .NET 5 after 3 major releases, and we plan to port even more of our controls in the next V3 release, including C1 TreeDB Grid. You can check out the full .NET 5 roadmap at this link on your screen. For FlexGrid, we've added a few helpful new features, including column pinning. With column pinning, users can now freeze columns at runtime. Pinned columns are automatically moved to the left and frozen during scroll. And this feature is enabled by just setting the allow pinning property to a single column or column range to allow the users to pin the columns. And this feature is supported in .NET Framework and higher, including .NET 5. We've recently published a highly detailed performance benchmark report for FlexGrid comparing the .NET 5 to .NET Framework performance. So we've compared the performance in a bunch of different areas, including generating and assigning data, painting the grid, scrolling, sorting, filtering, grouping, and auto sizing. In most cases, the .NET 5 version is a lot faster than the .NET Framework version. And you can check it out on our blogs at the link on your screen. Next, we've added grid and flow layouts to our popular input panel control. Input panel is a single control that lets you generate perfectly aligned input forms. You can do them instantly or manually, item by item. So in addition to the default stacked layout strategy, these new grid and flow layouts provide even greater flexibility to design your perfect input form. And this feature is supported in both .NET Framework and .NET 5. In this V2 release, we've added a few enhancements to ComponentOne Flex Pivot. The Flex Pivot chart for WinForms now supports axis grouping, which is helpful when the data is hierarchical. So most of the time, your pivot table shows multiple levels. So now the chart can equally visualize that same hierarchical data. And the pivot chart also now supports pie charts. Flex chart for WinForms now supports break-even charts. Break-even analysis is used to calculate marginal costs. This technique is widely used by production management and accountants, and these charts are supported in .NET Framework and .NET 5. In this release, we finally reintroduced the classic print document component and the C1 print preview controls. As you may remember, these controls were once part of the C1 report library, but when we replaced C1 report with Flex report, the print document and print preview controls were sort of left behind in a legacy library. So if people want to continue to use those outside of reporting, they can now use them in the new package. So we've repackaged the C1 print document component and the print preview controls in a new library called c1.win.printing. And with the C1 print document, these documents can be completely generated in code, bound to a database through a powerful and flexible data binding model. The print preview controls support the latest ribbon design with thumbnail support. And these controls are also supported in .NET Framework and as a beta in .NET 5. Lastly, for WinForms, we have introduced a new product bundle, which combines our WinForms UI controls with our data service components. It's the perfect bundle of everything we offer that's useful for just WinForms development. So as you may know, we also have Studio Enterprise, which includes everything under the Grape City ComponentOne umbrella. But that price point may be too much for some developers, considering if you're only interested in WinForms development. So our new data service components are useful for any and all .NET platforms, especially on the desktop. So we wanted to offer this middle priced bundle that has just the WinForms and the data components for $12.95, which is a better price in between the $9.95 and $14.95. So what all can you do with the data services? These components that are built on .NET Standard can be used for many things, such as integrating data from an online CRM like Salesforce, Dynamics, Google Analytics, QuickBooks, or really any service that provides an OData or JSON data source. You could build like an OData service to cache data to avoid repeat calls to the CRM that may have limits or price points that you want to avoid. You can pivot and aggregate on data from any online source using an in-memory data analysis library. It's separated from the UI. You can also strategically load large data sets with on-demand data virtualization to improve your performance. Again, this is best in the data components separated from the UI. And with ComponentOne WinForms Data Services Edition, these are made easier by combining the UI components and the data layer components. You can also extract data from atypical data sources like web pages or emails more easily. So really anything can become your data source. You can even move data from one data source to another, any of the sources that I mentioned. And the data sources let you do more specific things with data, like evaluate mathematical and spreadsheet expressions similar to Microsoft Excel. And you can even extend your desktop apps with server-side web APIs for document, report, and image uploads, and transfers to popular online data storage services like Dropbox, OneDrive, Google Drive, and more. And there's also more. You can also browse a working collection of real-world scenarios on the website if you click under Editions and click on Data Services. So specifically, let me just go over a bit more detail on what the data services provides, from a technical standpoint. It includes 6 libraries that do everything that I just mentioned. There's the data connectors that help you connect directly to a multitude of online services like Salesforce, Google Analytics, QuickBooks, and so on. This allows you to integrate that data into your .NET applications. And these connections support OAuth authentication, caching in a local database, as well as Visual Studio integration, which is actually a new feature of this release. You can now connect your data grid to any of the supported data sources by just clicking through the .NET Data Source Connection Wizard. Data Services also includes the data collection. Now, this gives you fast data binding and the loading for large data sets. So this component provides those necessary hooks to implement data virtualization for any data-aware controls, such as FlexGrid. In addition to data collection, there's the data engine. Now, this provides slicing and dicing and analysis for your data collection. With Data Engine, you can take advantage of in-memory caching to deliver faster extraction, transformation, and loading of your data sets. The Calc Engine is a handy little component that delivers Excel-like formula calculation anywhere in .NET. You can use it to parse and evaluate expressions like Microsoft Excel with support for common built-in functions. The text parser parses text, as the name implies, and it's useful to extract data from text and HTML files to basically increase the productivity in your workflow. So you can automate the process of extracting data from sources like emails and web pages. And lastly, the Web API we're making available as part of the Data Services Edition as well. Now, the Web API is a rich library of about 9 APIs that provide a wide range of web-related data features, some of which are useful for desktop apps, especially when you're working with online files like PDFs, images, or moving files to online. The Data Services Edition can also be licensed separately, so you don't have to get it with just WinForms or with Studio Enterprise. And that's also starting with the 2021 V2 release. If you'd like to learn more about one of these components, the data engine specifically, next week we will be hosting a deep dive webinar. Data engine adds, if you remember, the data analysis capabilities. So in this webinar, our product architect, John Jubak, will cover the following topics: importing data from multiple sources, writing queries in code using, and he'll also be using the cross-platform workbench tool to build the queries and visualize the results. He'll be adding ad hoc data analysis to a Blazor application as well. So you can sign up at grapesdata.com/webinars. Or if you've missed it, you can also check it out as a recording in the video library. Now, on to our WPF edition, where this release, we've been focusing on adding new controls and features to the .NET 5 lineup, including major enhancements to the data filter and filtering features for FlexGrid. We plan to fully support .NET 6 later in this year across all the ComponentOne controls that are currently supporting .NET 5. So with WPF, we're now at about 66% of the way to completing the migration. So this release adds just a few new controls to the list, and you can check out the full roadmap on our blog. We now plan to finish most of the controls for WPF by 2022. The biggest new enhancement this release in WPF is the newly revamped column menu and filtering in FlexGrid. From the menu, users can sort, group, and auto-size the columns, and we've improved the style and functionality of the filtering within this column menu. This screenshot here shows the multi-value checkbox filtering. You can also display special filters for Boolean, dates, numbers, as well as text and even search. And you can also do conditional filters that can be used or built using multiple and/or conditions. When a filter is applied, a little filter icon will appear in the column header. In .NET 5, the column filters will now use the data filter UI. So the C1 data filter control lets you build a complete filtering UI on the side of your application. So now you can choose to have it within the column of the FlexGrid or on the side of your application, just like popular websites like Amazon or any sites like that. In this release, we've added the conditional filtering to this control that lets you build more precise filters such as greater than and starts with. Plus, end users can build multiple condition filters using and or logic. Now, this enhancement is supported in .NET 5 apps only. For .NET 5, we've also added some design time improvements to some controls like FlexGrid and FlexChart. We're taking advantage of the new suggested actions feature in Visual Studio. With these suggested actions, you can perform some common quick actions directly from the Smart Tag menu. So this saves development time and decreases the learning curve to work with the ComponentOne WPF controls. And as always, you can expect more controls to receive these types of improvements in later releases. Some other WPF controls got enhancements, including the Flex Pivot now supports grouping by custom ranges. So normally when you group by data, it creates a unique value, or it creates a group for each unique value in the data set. But for some fields like numbers and dates, that's not ideal to group just by unique values. You need to be able to create a range or a bucket. So you could create a range like 1 to 100, or you could group dates by months or by quarters. So the Flex Pivot control then automatically aggregates all the values within each group to generate the pivot table. Our .NET 5 calendar supports multiple date selection, so it's now on par with the .NET Framework version. And that classic C1 print document component that I mentioned in WinForms is also available for WPF. And lastly, the FlexGrid for WPF now catches up the .NET Framework version as well with support for Excel export using the new c1.wpf.flexgrid.excel library. All right, so next on our journey through .NET, let's stop and talk about WinUI. So this release marks our debut for WinUI controls, which WinUI is Microsoft's latest .NET platform for developing Windows desktop apps on the WinUI 3.0 platform. It basically replaces UWP on Windows 10, which replaced WinRT on Windows 8. We've included 3 controls in this beta release: FlexGrid, Calendar, and Accordion. Now, there are 2 flavors of WinUI. There's WinUI on desktop and WinUI on UWP. At this time, we are only supporting the WinUI on desktop, which uses the Win32 with this new WinUI edition. And so, of course, you can't have ComponentOne without FlexGrid, our number one fast data grid control. FlexGrid takes your tabular data to the next level with on-demand loading, custom cells, built-in editor controls, responsive column layout, selection, and file export. The WinUI platform lends itself perfectly to create these modern-looking, fluent-styled controls with smooth animation and very clean designs, and also great for touchscreens. The WinUI calendar provides a touch-friendly date selection, or you could use it as like an appointment calendar within your WinUI desktop apps. So you can easily customize the calendar with built-in formatting, styles, and extensible templates. And like FlexGrid, it has smooth animation for navigation. And the WinUI accordion control, this provides a sleek layout for creating those sidebar navigation layouts, or just for organizing a list of data items. So this control supports different expand modes. So you could use it like a traditional accordion where one item opens at a time, or you could have multiple items open or have no items open, let them all collapse simultaneously. And this is just the start of our WinUI edition. You can expect a lot more to come in future releases. So the WinUI control rollout will be following that of Blazor. So let's next talk about Blazor. We've been rapidly enhancing our Blazor edition over the past year. In this release, we're adding one big new control, C1 Tree View, as well as some enhancements to FlexGrid and FlexChart. With the Blazor Tree View, you can now visualize and select hierarchical data. The Blazor Tree View provides powerful customization features for data visualization or navigation in your C# web apps. So you can customize the nodes with text, images, and connecting lines. It gives you interaction with selection, expanding, and collapsing nodes. And this is supported in Blazor Server and WebAssembly applications. We've added, for FlexGrid, we've added support for Excel export on the server-side version of Blazor FlexGrid. This feature allows exporting the grid as displayed, including all styles, to Microsoft Excel. And the features that are supported include row and column freezing, grouping, merging, and the cell styles. All of these features are preserved when exporting the grid. It's also possible to just export the selected cells. Our Blazor FlexChart control now supports various built-in annotations, such as rectangles, squares, circles, text, and images. So you can add these annotations to the chart to highlight certain data points and thresholds. You can also enable scrolling along either axis with the new axis scroll bar. So this type of scrolling works well with Blazor Server and the WebAssembly applications, as the control updates the view after the user drags either scroll thumb. In addition to the axis scroll bar, you can use the range selector component to allow scrolling between two charts, where one is a preview of all the data and one is a zoomed in chart. In addition to this axis scrolling, we've also added legend scrolling. So if you have too many items in that legend, they'll all be able to fit in the chart area without taking away space from the actual plot area. And lastly, for Blazor, the chart now supports animation for both updating and loading data points. So as I mentioned, all of these flex chart enhancements, they work well for Blazor Server and WebAssembly. So continuing on with web dev, let's take a look at what's new in ASP.NET MVC. So highlights this release include a new mapping control, as well as some charting enhancements. Our new Flex Map control lets you visualize data geographically on a map with just a few lines of code. The map control supports choropleth and point maps. So choropleth maps are used to show statistical values for geographic areas, where each area is colored based upon the data it represents. FlexMap also supports scatter point and bubble maps. So scatter maps are used to show points of interest at a specific coordinate. And when you create a bubble map, the bubble size depends on the value of the data as like a third dimension. And the maps are supported using GeoJSON. GeoJSON data is used to display the regions, and it also supports easy data binding, so you can visualize your geographic data on the map. Plus, the map is interactive, so you can let end users zoom using touch gestures or the zooming buttons. And plus, there's tooltips. This release for ASP.NET MVC and Core MVC, we're also introducing more palette choices for FlexChart. So the new palettes were inspired by Color Brewer 2 and are grouped into the following categories. We now have sequential palettes, which are best used to show ordered data that progresses from low to high or high to low to sort of highlight the sequential order of the data. There's also diverging palettes, which gives an equal emphasis to mid-range critical values and extremes at both ends. So light colors for mid-range and dark colors for extreme, high, and low values. And then, of course, the qualitative palette, which is just best used to show nominal or categorical data. So this color is not really indicative of the differences in values. So that about wraps up everything that's new in the 2021 V2 release. I've covered most of these highlights, but lastly, let me show you how you can update your ComponentOne controls. So just in case there's any new folks out there. So you really have two options to update. One is to use our web installer, the C1 control panel. So this lets you download and install any version of ComponentOne controls to your machine. Alternatively, you can use our publicly distributed NuGet packages on NuGet.org. So these NuGet packages are also installed locally if you install the product. So if you want to create a local repository, you could do that as well. The standard way to update and download is to use the C1 control panel, because this also gives you the samples. So if you click download from the website, this is the application that you will download. And if you've saved it to your computer, you can just launch it and update it without having to go through the website again to download it. So the full install from the install tab will give you all the latest samples and control libraries. You can choose the latest version from the dropdown, click the platform or check the platform tile, and then click proceed to perform the installation updates. Now, there's one more trick with this tool. If you just want to download a zip file of the control libraries, if you're maybe updating later, you don't necessarily need all the samples again, and maybe you're not using NuGet, you can actually get a zip from this as well. If you go to the build repository tab, just find the product there and then click download or update. And the difference there is that download will let you just download the zip and you can put it anywhere on your machine. Update will actually do like an intelligent install and just update the DLLs at the installation location. You can also find release notes from this menu as well. So the benefit of the full install, again, is that the files will be put in the right place. So I highly recommend the first time you download the product, you fully install it, as well as getting the samples. And some of our newest products, such as the WinUI, they're not in the build repository yet, but they will be. And from the C1 control panel, you can also activate a license or launch the samples Explore application. There's a lot more I could cover, but you'll have to check out other resources to figure that out. Oh, and did you know we also have icons? So if you're a customer and you have ComponentOne Studio Enterprise or even the former ComponentOne Ultimate, it includes icons, which allows you to distribute royalty-free about over 2,000 icons. And in this release, we've added an easy way to install them through the control panel. And we've also updated them with about 315 new icons following some latest design trends. So you can find the icon pack under Utilities. So that about wraps up the webinar today. So if we don't have any questions, then we will see you all at the next release around the time of .NET 6. Thank you.
Someone just chimed in with a question. They asked, when will we have Visual Studio Designer integration for WinForms.NET 5 controls, such as the ribbon control?
I would probably expect some advanced design time enhancements throughout 2022. For now, we've really been focusing on just getting as many of the controls to .NET 5 as possible. And a lot of those advanced designers will be following in sort of like the next wave. All right, thank you for the question. Anything else?
One more just came in. Although it's not related to ComponentOne Studio, so I don't think you'll know the answer. It's about Active Reports JS.
Okay.
When will Active Reports JS support modules? At the moment, I have to include a huge script file, even though I might not need everything at load time. The viewer is 1 megabyte of JavaScript and 8 megabytes for the designer.
Unfortunately, we're the ComponentOne team you're talking to here, so we don't know what the plan is with active reports. You're gonna have to chat with someone over from the AOR team. All right, is that it, Alec?
Yeah, that appears to be it for now.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Alec. And again, we'll see you at our next release around the time of .NET 6 later this year. Thanks, everybody.